Okay, so I just want to share with you a concept here again. Right now, inside the table layer gradient is 100% opacity on top of the original table. So as an example, if I hide this, you'll see there's my original table. Now here's what I'd like to be able to do. Okay, I'm not a big fan of this solid gradient because it doesn't look natural, it doesn't look realistic. It kind of looks really horrible. Now the other thing I need to pay attention to here, when this was selected, it's kind of all choppy in here. Now I have other videos that are going to show you better techniques for making better selection. But this is the understanding how Photoshop thinks and how it works and how you can make changes. Now here's what I want to be able to do. We want to change the opacity of this layer. Okay, so we can change the opacity of this layer's opacity by, let's do something like, let's change this to 58%, or let's change it to 27%. So now I'm getting a slight opacity of my layer on top of the tablecloth. Now let's go back and keep this back to 100%. Now, again, similar to how I work with a brush, I can choose to discolorize the pixels. So how cool is that? So now I have a gradient that colorizes the pixel choice that I pick between dark green and light green on top of the existing tablecloth. If I hide that, I get something like this. Right? So it kept the tonal quality, it kept the highlights, it kept the shadows, but it basically applied a gradient on top of it in color mode. Okay? So I simply changed it to color mode. Now, if you don't want that intensity of this green in here, it's still in color mode, then you could back off the opacity. So I'm going to take the opacity and move this down a little bit. So now I just have a touch of color, a hint of color. Right now I have no color. Right now I have 55% color. Right now I have 100% color. But let's say, well, I'm looking at this saying, well, that's nice, but this green is a little overbearing. So let's change our whole color scheme. How do we do that? Well, let's go to the eyedropper, and let's pick more softer colors. Let's pick maybe this light peach for the foreground color, Option key, and let's pick this darker peach for the background color. Now, good production technique to get into, guys. Let's say that your client's not sure they like this, but they're not sure they don't like it. Well, that should tell you right off the bat to make a clone copy of this. So let's duplicate this. Let's call this table green. Hide this because we don't need to see it any longer. Let's double click here and call this table peach. Makes sense to me. Make change, save a change. Okay, so let's do the same thing here. Let's load the selection, Command click to load the selection. We're in the foreground color, background color, right? So I can just go back to my G for gradient tool and let's put that gradient back in there. And there you go. Now, I don't want the opacity to be 22%. I want the opacity to be 100%. I'm going to click and drag, and there's my new color scheme. More of a sepia color tone. Okay? Now again, you can keep making copies, but if you know you really don't like it, then just replace what you have. So in this particular case, let's just pick something a little more neutral, a little more subtle. Let's go a gradient that has maybe this white, this darkish color right about light color here, Option key, and let's pick this little color right there. So it's almost the same. It's a very neutral kind of mauve type of color. Again, make sure that your gradient tool in normal color mode, 100% opacity. Now we could, just to share with you, if I don't want to change the layers color mode, so we can change this back to normal mode, right? And we could change this to color mode. And we could do something like that. Now, understand the difference though. Okay, the color mode for this, for the gradient, is going to affect the color mode on top of the color, but it's not going to affect the color mode on top of this layer. So two different things happening. So let's do that. Let's go back a step. Okay, let's change this back to normal. Let's change this back to color. Well, that is color. So now, again, normal 100% opacity using these two tonal qualities here, and with the gradient tool, and I'm just going to drag right through there. And Command D. That looks a little better, a little more interesting. That color scheme works a little nicer for me. Okay, now again, if you want to show more of the less saturated color in here, you could just take the opacity and drag it back down. So the closer you get to 0, you're going to see nothing. But if you just want like a touch of color, right about there, then there you go. Okay. So the last thing you want to do with your Photoshop file is you don't want someone to look at it and say, oh, no, it looks like you didn't Photoshop. You want to not have that. You want to say, hey, that's a cool looking photo. That's a great photo. How you position those roses there, that looks nice. You want to make it look as realistic as possible. Okay, so these little production techniques are going to help you to be better when using Photoshop. The most important thing and the most difficult thing to do in Photoshop, guys, is to select something, isolate something. Once it's selected, you could choose to jump into a layer. You could choose to save it as a channel under the select menu. Then you could choose to use different modes, different blending modes for painting, different blending modes for how one layer affects the other layer. In fact, let me show you a very cool technique here. This is right out of the box, right? I just want to see my fruit working copy layer. I'm going to save this, by the way. Okay, so how do I just see my fruit layer without all the other stuff I did? I hold down the Option key and I click the eyeball. That's going to hide everything but the fruit layer. Option key again puts everything back. Okay, so I just want to see my fruit layer, and I want to be inside my fruit layer, so I hold down the, well, since my mouse is right here, guys, I can just click right there. I'm inside my fruit layer. And I'm going to share with you a really, really cool technique. And it's a simple technique that you do to make your photographs look more interesting with little to no work. We're simply going to take our fruit working copy. We're going to drag it down to here. Now this layer is on top of this layer. Now, for practical purposes, this layer is exactly the same as this layer. Okay, they're both normal mode. But what I want to do here is I want to punch out some of the highlights. I can change this to hard white. So watch what happens here. Okay, now that makes it very dark and ominous looking. Okay, say that 5 times fast. Now, if I hit the F key, I'm going to hide the palettes and hide my secondary palettes. Right? But I don't want, this is just too much for me. I'm going to hit the F key again. Now I can play games with my opacity. So now I can take the opacity, and this is with no settings, and now I can just boost up my opacity level until I get about what I'm looking for. Maybe something right about there. So hard light is a very cool thing to be able to do because it's going to affect the one layer on top of the other with little to no work here. It simply punched it out. Now we could experiment with different photos. We'll do that in another series of photos, in another series of classes. But you can do that in your own practice. Just have a photo, make a clone copy of the layer, change the top layer to hard light, and adjust the opacity. You'll see an amazing difference between the two by using literally seconds, 2 seconds of technique. So we'll continue this understanding in our next video. Talk to you soon.